The X-Men, A Bedtime History, an extended journey through the world of mutants and dreams. Prologue, The First Dream. Before there were X-Men, before there was a school hidden among the rolling hills of Westchester County, there was a young man named Charles Francis Xavier who dared to dream of tomorrow. Born into wealth and privilege, blessed with a mind that could touch others across vast distances, Charles might have lived a life of quiet comfort. Instead, he chose a harder path, one that would lead him through darkness and light, loss and hope, to become the guiding star for all who would follow. In the aftermath of the Second World War, as the world struggled to rebuild from its own capacity for horror, young Charles encountered another gifted soul in the rubble of what had once been Haifa. Eric Lensher was his name, and the magnetism that flowed through his body was matched only by the rage that burned in his heart. Together, they worked to help survivors of humanity's darkest hour, and in those quiet moments between rescue and recovery, they spoke of dreams. Charles dreamed of integration, of a world where human and mutant children might play together in schoolyards without fear. Eric dreamed of separation, of a homeland where mutants could live without the constant threat of persecution. Both dreams were born from love, love for their people, love for the future. But love can take many forms, and not all of them lead to the same destination. Their friendship would fracture, as friendships sometimes do when ideology hardens into certainty. But in those early days, working side by side among the refugees and the displaced, they planted seeds that would grow into the mighty oaks of Xavier's school and the Brotherhood of Mutants. Neither man could have imagined then how their dreams would shape the world, how their philosophical differences would echo through generations of those who came after. Chapter 1: The Mansion's Foundation. The mansion that would become home to countless young mutants began its life in 1912 as the estate of the Xavier family. Built in the colonial revival style, its red brick walls and white columns spoke of old money and older traditions. The grounds stretched across nearly 100 acres of carefully maintained lawns, ancient trees, and hidden pathways that wound between formal gardens and wild meadows. Charles Xavier inherited this estate upon his parents' death, but he transformed it into something unprecedented in human history, a sanctuary for the gifted, the feared, the misunderstood. In the mansion's basement levels, he installed technology that would have seemed like science fiction to most observers. A computer system called Cerebro, capable of amplifying telepathic abilities to global range, allowing its user to locate mutants anywhere on Earth. The Danger Room, that marvel of engineering and imagination, occupied a vast space beneath the mansion's east wing. Here, holographic projections and physical obstacles could create any training scenario conceivable, from simple gymnastics routines to full-scale battle simulations. Advanced force fields and medical systems ensured that students could push their limits safely, learning to control abilities that might otherwise prove catastrophic. But the mansion was more than just advanced technology and hidden training facilities. It was a home in the truest sense, a place where young people who had never fit in anywhere else could finally belong. The common rooms echoed with laughter and conversation in dozens of languages. The library contained not only conventional books, but also rare texts on mutation theory, evolutionary biology, and philosophy. The dormitory wings housed students from every corner of the globe, their diverse backgrounds creating a tapestry of human experience unlike any other school on Earth. Professor Xavier walked these halls with quiet pride, watching as teenagers who had arrived, broken and afraid, gradually blossomed into confident young adults. Some would become X-Men, dedicating their lives to protecting a world that feared them. Others would become teachers, doctors, artists, and scientists, using their gifts to make the world a better place in ways both large and small. All would carry with them the fundamental lesson Xavier taught, that being different was not a curse, but a gift, and that true strength came not from power, but from how one chose to use it. Chapter 2. The Original Five and Their Early Adventures. On a crisp autumn morning in 1963, 5 teenagers gathered in the mansion's main hallway, their luggage at their feet and uncertainty in their eyes. They could not have known that they were making history, that they would become the foundation upon which an entire legacy would be built. Scott Summers arrived first, a young man whose tragic past had left him both vulnerable and strong. His story began in childhood with a plane crash that killed his parents and left him and his brother, Alex, orphans. The traumatic head injury Scott sustained in that crash damaged the part of his brain that would have allowed him to control his mutant ability. From his eyes poured forth beams of pure concussive force, crimson energy that could punch through steel or level buildings. Only glasses made from ruby quartz could contain this power, and Scott would spend his life looking at the world through a red filter, both literally and metaphorically. Xavier found Scott in an orphanage in Nebraska, a quiet boy who had learned to keep his head down and his eyes closed. The professor saw immediately that Scott possessed not only tremendous power, but also the discipline and moral character necessary to lead others. Under Xavier's patient guidance, Scott learned to see his abilities not as a curse, but as a responsibility. He became Cyclops, field leader of the X-Men, a tactical genius whose protective instincts ran as deep as underground rivers. Jean Grey came to the mansion as a young girl of 10, her telepathic and telekinetic abilities having manifested traumatically when she witnessed the death of her best friend Annie Richardson. The psychic link Jean had formed with Annie meant that she experienced her friend's death as if it were her own, leaving her catatonic for weeks. When she finally awakened, she found that she could hear the thoughts of everyone around her, a cacophony of mental voices that threatened to drive her insane. Xavier helped Joan build mental walls to protect herself from the overflow of others' thoughts, but he also did something else, something he would later question and regret. Sensing within Joan a power that dwarfed even his own, a cosmic force that slumbered in the depths of her psyche like a dragon in its cave, he placed additional barriers around that deeper power. He told himself it was for her own protection and for the protection of the world. He could not have known that in trying to protect everyone, he was setting the stage for tragedy. As Jean grew into her abilities, she became Marvel Girl, her telekinetic powers allowing her to move objects with her mind, create protective force fields, and even achieve limited flight. But more than her powers, Jean brought compassion to the team. She had experienced the darkest depths of psychic trauma and emerged with an even greater capacity for empathy. She became the heart of the X-Men, the one who reminded them all why they fought, not for glory or recognition, but to protect others from experiencing the pain they had known. Warren Worthington III arrived at the mansion carrying wings upon his shoulders and privilege in his bearing. Born to one of America's wealthiest families, Warren had never known want or hardship until his mutation manifested. The beautiful white wings that sprouted from his back during adolescence seemed like a blessing at first. They allowed him to soar through the sky with the grace of a bird, to touch the clouds and dance with the wind. But Warren soon learned that even the most beautiful mutations could become a source of fear and hatred. His father, disgusted by his son's transformation, threatened to disown him. Classmates who had once envied his wealth now whispered behind his back about freaks and monsters. Warren came to Xavier's school not just seeking control of his abilities, but searching for acceptance and understanding. As Angel, Warren brought not only his power of flight, but also his resources to the X-Men. The Worthington family fortune would help fund the team's operations for years to come. More importantly, Warren's journey from privilege to persecution gave him a unique perspective on human nature. He had seen how quickly acceptance could turn to fear, how easily love could become hatred. This knowledge made him both more cautious and more committed to Xavier's dream of peaceful coexistence. Robert Drake, known to his friends as Bobby, arrived at the mansion as the youngest member of the original team, his infectious humor masking depths of power that even he didn't fully understand. Bobby's ability to manipulate moisture and temperature seemed simple enough at first. He could create ice slides to travel on, freeze water instantly, or lower the temperature of a room. He called himself Iceman and delighted in the playful applications of his abilities. But Bobby's true potential was far greater than anyone realized in those early days. He was not simply someone who could create ice. He was a being who could manipulate thermal energy on a molecular level. In theory, he could freeze entire oceans or stop molecular motion completely, achieving absolute zero, a power that rivaled some of the most formidable mutants on Earth. Yet Bobby's greatest strength was perhaps his ability to remain grounded and human despite these vast abilities. His jokes and pranks reminded everyone that beneath the costumes and code names, they were still young people trying to figure out their place in the world. Henry McCoy completed the original roster, a young man whose brilliant mind was matched only by his acrobatic prowess. Hank possessed the agility and strength of a great ape, and able to leap incredible distances and perform feats of gymnastics that defy conventional understanding of human limitation. His oversized hands and feet marked him as visibly different, but it was his intellect that truly set him apart. Even as a teenager, Hank could engage in scientific discussions with professors twice his age. He devoured books on everything from quantum physics to ancient poetry, his curiosity as boundless as his physical abilities. As Beast, he brought both brawn and brains to the X-Men, often serving as the team's scientific advisor and resident polymath. His verbose vocabulary and tendency toward alliteration endeared him to some and exasperated others, but no one could question his loyalty or courage. These 5 young people, so different in background and temperament, became a family in the truest sense. They trained together in the danger room, their abilities pushing each other to new heights. They studied together in the mansion's classrooms, their diverse perspectives enriching every discussion. They laughed together in the common rooms, and they grieved together when missions went wrong. Their early adventures read like a catalog of the strange and wonderful threats that would come to define the X-Men's world. They battled the Vanisher, a mutant thief who could teleport at will. They confronted the Blob, an immovable mountain of flesh and attitude who could absorb kinetic energy and redirect it back at his attackers. They faced Unus the Untouchable, whose personal force field made him nearly invulnerable but also tragically isolated from human contact. Each of these encounters taught the young X-Men valuable lessons about the nature of power and responsibility. They learned that not every mutant they encountered would become an ally, that some would choose to use their gifts for personal gain rather than the greater good. They discovered that victory was not always achieved through superior firepower, that sometimes the greatest triumph came from showing compassion to an enemy or finding a way to resolve conflict without violence. Most importantly, they learned that being an X-Man meant being willing to sacrifice for others who might never appreciate that sacrifice. They fought to protect humans who feared and hated them, not because those humans deserved protection, but because everyone deserved protection. This understanding would become the bedrock of the X-Men's philosophy, the principle that would guide generations of mutant heroes who followed in their footsteps. Chapter 3: The Brotherhood of Mutants. As Professor Xavier gathered his students around the dream of peaceful coexistence, his former friend Eric Langehair walked a darker path through the shadows of human hatred. The boy who had survived the Nazi concentration camps, who had watched his family die in the gas chambers, had grown into a man who believed that history was doomed to repeat itself unless mutants took control of their own destiny. Magneto, as Eric now called himself, stood as the dark mirror to Xavier's idealistic vision. Where Charles saw potential for harmony, Eric saw inevitable conflict. Where Xavier preached integration, Magneto proclaimed supremacy. Yet both men were motivated by the same fundamental desire to protect their people from the horrors they had witnessed in their youth. Eric's first followers came to him not through coercion, but through recognition of a kindred spirit. Mystique had spent decades hiding her true form beneath false faces, her blue skin and yellow eyes marking her as obviously inhuman. Raven Darkholme, as she was sometimes known, possessed not only the ability to shapeshift, but also an intellect sharp enough to serve as Magneto's chief strategist and most trusted lieutenant. Her shapeshifting abilities made her the perfect spy and infiltrator, but it was her unwavering loyalty to the mutant cause that made her invaluable. Mystique's own history was shrouded in mystery and pain. She had lived for over a century, watching as humanity's fear of the different and the strange manifested in everything from witch trials to concentration camps. She had loved and lost, hidden and revealed herself, played hero and villain as circumstances required. By the time she joined Magneto's cause, she had concluded that peaceful coexistence was a beautiful dream, but an impossible reality. The Toad, Mortimer Toynbee, came to Magneto as a broken creature seeking purpose and protection. His mutation had granted him incredible leaping ability and a prehensile tongue, but it had also left him with an appearance that invited ridicule and disgust from ordinary humans. Toad's servile devotion to Magneto stemmed not just from fear, but from gratitude. Here, finally, was someone who valued his abilities rather than mocking his appearance. Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch joined the Brotherhood as reluctant allies bound by debt rather than ideology. Pietro and Wanda Maximoff possessed abilities that bordered on the miraculous. Pietro could move at superhuman speeds, while Wanda could manipulate probability itself, creating what appeared to be magical effects through the power of chaos. Unknown to the X-Men at the time, these twins were Magneto's own children, though their relationship was complicated by years of abandonment and resentment. Pietro's super speed came with the psychological burden of living in a world that moved like molasses around him. Every conversation was an exercise in patience, every moment of waiting an eternity of frustration. His arrogance and short temper were defense mechanisms developed to cope with the isolation that came from experiencing time differently than everyone around him. Wanda, meanwhile, struggled with powers that seemed to have a mind of their own. Her hex bolts could cause weapons to jam, structures to collapse, or enemies to suffer improbably bad luck, but the exact effects were often unpredictable. This lack of control over her abilities reflected her lack of control over her life. She and Pietro had been manipulated and used by various factions since childhood, never quite free to make their own choices. The early conflicts between the X-Men and the Brotherhood established patterns that would persist for decades. These were not simple battles between good and evil, but philosophical wars between competing visions of the future. When Magneto attacked military installations or government facilities, he genuinely believed he was striking preemptive blows against those who would eventually move against mutants. When the X-Men stopped him, they were not just protecting human lives, but also defending their belief that a better way was possible. The Brotherhood's attacks were carefully calculated to demonstrate mutant superiority without causing massive civilian casualties. Magneto was many things, but he was not a genocidal monster in those early days. He wanted to rule humanity, not exterminate it. He believed that mutants were the next step in evolution and that Homo sapiens would eventually have to accept their place as a subordinate species. This belief gave his actions a logical consistency that made him more than just a terrorist. He was a revolutionary, fighting for what he saw as the natural order. The X-Men's responses to these attacks revealed the complexity of their position. They fought to protect human lives, but they also understood the legitimate grievances that drove their enemies. Scott Summers might disagree with Magneto's methods, but he could not deny the reality of anti-mutant prejudice. Jean Grey might stop Mystique from infiltrating a government facility, but she could empathize with the blue-skinned woman's experiences of rejection and hatred. These early confrontations also established the personal relationships that would complicate future conflicts. Scott and Jean's love story played out against the backdrop of ideological warfare. Warren's privileged background put him at odds with the Brotherhood's anti-establishment rhetoric. Bobby's humor provided moments of levity in otherwise grim situations, while Hank's intellectual curiosity led him to engage with the philosophical underpinnings of the conflict, rather than simply treating it as a series of battles to be won. Professor Xavier's own relationship with Magneto added another layer of complexity to these encounters. Charles could feel Eric's pain through their psychic connection, could understand the trauma that drove his former friend toward extremism. Yet he could not compromise his principles or abandon his dream of peaceful coexistence. Each battle between the X-Men and the Brotherhood was, in a sense, a continuation of conversations that Charles and Eric had begun years earlier in the aftermath of the Holocaust. The mansion itself became a symbol in this conflict, a place where young mutants could learn to control their abilities without being forced to choose between Xavier's dream and Magneto's vision. Some students would eventually join the X-Men, dedicating their lives to protection and service. Others would graduate and enter ordinary careers, using their abilities to improve the world in small, everyday ways. A few would eventually be swayed by the Brotherhood's arguments, concluding that humanity would never accept them peacefully. This philosophical divide would echo through every aspect of the X-Men's future adventures. It raised questions that had no easy answers. Was violence ever justified in the service of a greater good? Could peaceful coexistence truly be achieved between groups with such vast power differentials? How long should the oppressed wait for their oppressors to change their hearts and minds? The Brotherhood's existence forced the X-Men to constantly examine their own motivations and methods. They could not simply fight crime or battle obvious villains. They had to grapple with the possibility that their enemies might be right about some things, even if their methods were wrong. This moral complexity would become one of the X-Men's defining characteristics, setting them apart from other superhero teams and making their stories resonate with readers who recognize similar struggles in their own world. Chapter 4: The Sentinels and the Fear of Tomorrow. Dr. Bolivar Trask had dedicated his life to the study of mutation with the passion of a true scientist and the fervor of a man who believed he was saving the world. A brilliant roboticist and geneticist, Trask possessed the kind of mind that could see patterns others missed, connections that existed in the spaces between disciplines. Unfortunately, the pattern he saw in the emergence of mutants filled him with dread rather than wonder. Trask's research had led him to conclude that mutants represented an evolutionary leap so significant that it would inevitably lead to the extinction of baseline humanity. He presented his findings to government officials with charts and graphs, statistical projections that painted a picture of Homo sapiens going the way of the Neanderthals. His solution was as elegant as it was terrifying. Giant robots programmed to identify, capture, and, if necessary, eliminate the mutant threat before it could overwhelm humanity. The first Sentinels stood nearly 20 feet tall, their purple and pink armor gleaming with the promise of technological salvation. Their programming was deceptively simple. Locate mutants using advanced scanning technology, classify their threat level, and respond with appropriate force. Nonviolent mutants would be captured and contained. Those who resisted would be terminated. The robots possessed adaptive capabilities, allowing them to adjust their tactics based on the abilities they encountered. When the X-Men first faced the Sentinels, the encounter revealed the full horror of Trask's vision. These were not mere machines, but harbingers of a possible future where fear had overcome reason, where the response to difference was systematic elimination. The Sentinels fought with mechanical precision, their attacks coordinated and ruthless. They felt no doubt, no mercy, no possibility of being reasoned with or reformed. The battle took place in the skies above New York City, where civilians could witness both the threat the Sentinels represented and the heroism of the X-Men who opposed them. Cyclops' optic blasts carved through the air in brilliant ruby streams, his tactical mind working to find weaknesses in the robot's armor and programming. Jean Grey lifted cars and debris with her telekinetic powers, using them as weapons, while simultaneously creating protective shields around innocent bystanders. Angel swooped and dove through the mechanical giant's defenses, his aerial maneuverability allowing him to strike at vulnerable joints and sensors. Iceman created massive ice barriers to slow the Sentinels' advance while firing precision ice blasts at their optical systems. Beast bounded from robot to robot with impossible grace, his scientific knowledge allowing him to identify critical systems and disable them with surgical strikes. The battle's outcome was less important than its implications. Even in victory, the X-Men recognized that they had faced something fundamentally different from previous threats. The Sentinels represented the industrialization of prejudice, hatred refined into algorithm and given physical form. They were the logical endpoint of fear, a solution that required no human conscience, no moment of doubt or reconsideration. Professor Xavier's attempt to reach Trask telepathically revealed the complexity of the man behind the machines. Trask genuinely believed he was protecting humanity from extinction. His anti-mutant rhetoric was not born from simple hatred, but from a kind of twisted love. Love for his species, love for his vision of the future, love for the order and predictability that mutants seemed to threaten. The tragedy was that Trask's fears were not entirely unfounded. Mutants did represent a significant evolutionary development. Some did possess world-threatening levels of power. The potential for conflict between mutant and human was real and growing. But Trask's solution addressed these concerns in the worst possible way, creating exactly the kind of conflict he claimed to want to prevent. The Sentinels' impact on the mutant community extended far beyond their immediate threat. Young mutants who had been considering revealing their abilities to friends and family retreated deeper into secrecy. Those who had been living openly began to hide once more. The robots had made abstract fears concrete, giving them form and purpose and direction. At Xavier's school, the mansion's defensive systems were upgraded and expanded. The danger room scenarios became more realistic, more focused on survival rather than simple skill development. Students who had never considered the possibility of persecution began to understand why the X-Men existed, why some mutants chose to fight rather than hide. The government's relationship with the X-Men became more complicated following the Sentinel crisis. Some officials recognized the X-Men as heroes who had protected civilians from robotic attackers. Others saw them as part of the same mutant problem the Sentinels had been designed to solve. This ambiguity would plague the X-Men for years to come, forcing them to navigate a political landscape where today's ally might become tomorrow's enemy. Magneto's response to the Sentinels was swift and decisive. He saw in Trask's creations the validation of everything he had preached about human hatred and mutant vulnerability. The Brotherhood's attacks on Sentinel production facilities were not mere terrorism, but acts of war against an enemy that had declared its intention to commit genocide. For once, even some of Xavier's students found themselves questioning whether Magneto's methods might be necessary. The Sentinels also introduced an element of technological evolution to the mutant-human conflict. Each generation of robots was more advanced than the last, incorporating lessons learned from previous encounters with mutant abilities. They developed countermeasures for telekinesis, adapted to telepathic intrusion, and evolved strategies for dealing with energy projectors and physical powerhouses alike. This technological arms race created a feedback loop of escalation. As Sentinels became more sophisticated, mutants were forced to become more creative and aggressive in their responses. Peaceful coexistence became harder to envision when one side was literally building machines designed to hunt the other. The psychological impact on individual X-Men was profound. Scott Summers, already burdened by the destructive nature of his powers, now had to grapple with the fact that those same powers made him a target for systematic elimination. Jean Grey's telepathy, which had always connected her intimately to the thoughts and emotions of others, now revealed the depth of fear and hatred that the Sentinels represented. Warren Worthington's visible mutation, his beautiful wings, became a liability in a world where advanced sensors could identify mutants from great distances. Bobby Drake's playful attitude toward his powers was tempered by the recognition that his abilities were being studied, cataloged, and countered by machines that felt no humor or mercy. Hank McCoy perhaps struggled most of all with the implications of the Sentinel program. His scientific mind could appreciate the elegance of Trask's engineering while simultaneously being horrified by its application. The same intellectual curiosity that drove his research could understand the logic behind the robot's programming while recognizing the moral bankruptcy of their purpose. The Sentinels represented more than just another enemy to be fought and defeated. They were a glimpse into a possible future where the conflict between human and mutant had been resolved through the simple expedient of elimination. They showed what fear could build when given unlimited resources and technological capability. They were the nightmare that haunted Xavier's dream, the shadow that followed every moment of progress toward peaceful coexistence. In quiet moments, when the immediate threat had passed and the robots lay in pieces, the X-Men would contemplate the larger questions the Sentinels raised. How could they protect a world that saw protection itself as a threat? How could they prove their peaceful intentions to people who had already decided they were dangerous? How could they maintain hope in the face of such systematic, mechanized hatred? These questions had no easy answers, but they did have purpose. They reminded the X-Men why their mission was necessary, why Xavier's dream was worth pursuing despite the obstacles. In a world that could create Sentinels, there had to be voices calling for better alternatives. In a future that might hold only conflict and elimination, there had to be hands working to build something different. The Sentinels would return again and again, in different forms and with new capabilities. Each appearance would test the X-Men's resolve and force them to evolve their own tactics and strategies. But the first encounter established the template that would define these conflicts. Not just a battle between heroes and machines, but a struggle between two visions of the future. One based on fear and control, the other on hope and acceptance. Chapter 5: The Expanding Universe of Mutants. As the X-Men's reputation grew and their influence spread, the mansion's doors opened to welcome new students and allies from every corner of the world. Each arrival brought not only unique abilities, but also fresh perspectives on what it meant to be different in a world that valued conformity above almost everything else. Lorna Dane arrived at the school during a thunderstorm that seemed to echo the turmoil in her own life. Her green hair rippled like ocean waves in an unfelt breeze, and metal objects throughout the mansion trembled in response to her emotional state. She possessed magnetic powers similar to those of the man she would later learn was her father, Magneto himself. But where Eric's abilities were focused and controlled, Lorna's were wild and unpredictable. Professor Xavier worked patiently with Lorna to help her understand and control her gifts. He recognized in her the same potential for both creation and destruction that he had seen in Eric years before. The parallel was not lost on anyone. Here was a young woman with the power to move mountains, the daughter of their greatest enemy, seeking to use her abilities for protection rather than conquest. Lorna's relationship with the X-Men was complicated by her heritage, but it was her romance with Alex Summers that truly grounded her at the mansion. Havoc, Scott's younger brother, possessed the ability to absorb cosmic radiation and discharge it as devastating plasma blasts. Like his sibling, Alex had struggled with powers that seemed designed for destruction rather than protection. In Lorna, he found someone who understood the burden of potentially catastrophic abilities. Their love story played out against training sessions in the danger room and quiet conversations in the mansion's gardens. Alex's plasma energy and Lorna's magnetic fields could complement each other in combat, creating devastating combination attacks that few enemies could withstand. More importantly, they helped each other find balance. Alex's steady personality grounded Lorna's sometimes volatile emotions, while her passion and conviction inspired him to embrace his role as a hero, rather than simply accepting it as a burden. From the Canadian wilderness came Logan, though few knew his true name when he first arrived. He called himself Wolverine, and his reputation preceded him like smoke before fire. Government agents and military officials spoke of him in whispers, a weapon more than a man, a killer who had been shaped by programs so classified that their very existence was denied. Logan's arrival at the mansion was not a homecoming, but a collision. He had been sent to kill Professor Xavier by forces that remained hidden in shadow and bureaucracy. The telepathic professor's influence over mutant affairs had grown too significant for some people's comfort, and Logan was their chosen instrument of elimination. The battle that erupted when Wolverine first encountered the X-Men was unlike anything the young heroes had experienced. This was not an ideological conflict or a case of mistaken identity. This was pure animalistic violence unleashed in the mansion's peaceful halls. Logan's adamantium claws could cut through virtually any material. His enhanced senses made him nearly impossible to surprise, and his healing factor allowed him to recover from injuries that would have killed ordinary men. Cyclops' optic beams struck Logan repeatedly, only to watch the wounds heal almost instantly. Jean Grey's telekinetic powers could slow him down, but could not stop his relentless advance. Angel's aerial mobility was useless in the mansion's corridors, while Iceman's ice constructs were shattered by those terrible claws. Beast's agility and intellect proved inadequate against an opponent who fought with pure instinct and seemingly unlimited endurance. It was Professor Xavier's telepathic intervention that ended the conflict, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of simply overwhelming Logan's mind with psychic force, Charles chose to look deeper, to understand what had driven this man to violence. What he found horrified him. Layers upon layers of false memories, implanted conditioning, and psychological manipulation that had turned a human being into a living weapon. Logan's real memories were fragmented and painful, buried beneath decades of mental programming. He remembered being a soldier, remembered fighting in wars that stretched back to the 1940s, remembered pain and loss and betrayal. But the specifics remained elusive, hidden behind walls that had been built by hands other than his own. The Weapon X program, as it came to be known, had taken Logan and transformed him into something beyond human. They had laced his skeleton with unbreakable adamantium, enhanced his already formidable healing abilities, and conditioned him to be the perfect killing machine. But they had also stolen something irreplaceable: his sense of self, his connection to his own past, his ability to trust and love without reservation. Xavier's decision to offer Logan sanctuary at the mansion was controversial among the X-Men. Here was a man who had been literally designed to kill, whose conditioning might reassert itself at any moment. Some students were afraid to be in the same room with him, while others saw him as a fascinating puzzle to be solved. Logan himself was perhaps the most conflicted of all. He had come to kill Xavier and instead found acceptance. He had expected to fight and instead found family. The mansion's peaceful atmosphere was alien to someone who had known only conflict for decades, yet something in its halls called to whatever humanity remained beneath the animal conditioning. Storm arrived at the mansion like her namesake, with sudden, overwhelming power that reshaped everything around her. Aurora Monroe had been worshipped as a goddess in the remote villages of Kenya. Her ability to control weather patterns, making her both revered and isolated. She could call down lightning with a gesture, summon winds that could level forests and bring rain to drought-stricken lands or clear skies to areas plagued by storms. But Aurora's true gift was not her command over the elements. It was her profound understanding of balance and natural harmony. She had lived close to the earth, had felt the rhythms of season and storm in her very bones. Her weather powers were not separate from her personality, but an extension of it, reflecting her moods and emotions in ways that were both beautiful and dangerous. When Professor Xavier first encountered Aurora, she was using her abilities to help subsistence farmers cope with an extended drought. Her motivations were entirely altruistic. She asked for nothing in return for her help, sought no recognition or reward. Charles saw in her not just incredible power, but also the wisdom and compassion necessary to use that power responsibly. Aurora's transition from African goddess to American superhero was not without challenges. The technological marvels of Xavier's school seemed cold and artificial after a lifetime spent in communion with natural forces. The complex moral questions that the X-Men grappled with regularly contrasted sharply with the clearer ethical framework she had known in her village. Yet Storm brought to the X-Men something they had not realized they were missing: a connection to the natural world and a perspective that extended beyond human concerns. Her weather powers made her one of the most formidable members of the team, but it was her spiritual wisdom that made her indispensable. She helped other mutants understand that their abilities were not separate from themselves, but part of a larger web of existence that connected all living things. From the cold reaches of Siberia came Pyotr Rasputin, a young man whose gentle soul seemed at odds with his incredible physical abilities. Peter, as he was known to his friends, possessed the power to transform his entire body into organic steel, granting him incredible strength and near invulnerability. In his armored form, he could lift automobiles over his head, punch through reinforced concrete, and shrug off attacks that would devastate ordinary humans. But Peter's true nature was revealed not in battle, but in the quiet moments between conflicts. He was an artist whose paintings captured beauty in unexpected places: the play of light on snow, the expression of wonder on a child's face, the delicate architecture of frost on a window. His massive steel hands could create works of art so detailed and nuanced that they seemed to breathe with life. Peter's arrival at the mansion coincided with a period of great turmoil for the X-Men. The team had suffered losses, faced betrayals, and grappled with questions about their mission and methods. His presence brought stability and perspective, reminding everyone that beneath the costumes and code names, they were still people with dreams and aspirations beyond the conflicts that consumed so much of their attention. The relationship between Peter and his teammates developed slowly, built on small gestures of kindness and understanding rather than dramatic moments of crisis. He helped Bobby Drake with mathematics homework, discussing equations with the patience of someone who understood that not everyone's mind worked the same way. He spent hours listening to Warren Worthington talk through his complicated relationship with his father, offering comfort without judgment or advice. Most significantly, Peter formed a deep friendship with Kurt Wagner, the blue-furred teleporter whose demonic appearance had made him a target of fear and hatred throughout his life. Where others saw a monster, Peter saw a kindred spirit, someone whose physical form belied a gentle spiritual nature. Their conversations about faith, art, and the nature of humanity became legendary among the mansion's residents, philosophical discussions that could last entire nights. Kurt's own arrival at the school had been marked by drama and misunderstanding. His teleportation abilities, combined with his obviously inhuman appearance, had made him a target of religious fanatics who saw him as a literal demon. His blue fur, pointed tail, and fanged teeth certainly supported that interpretation, but those who took the time to know Kurt discovered a man of profound faith and unshakable moral conviction. Nightcrawler, as he became known, could teleport across vast distances in the blink of an eye, disappearing in a puff of sulphurous.